In the quiet town of San Diego, a haunting mystery unfolded the life of a young mother named Elizabeth Sullivan. Her disappearance in the late hours of October 13th, 2014, sent shockwaves through the community, leaving her family and friends in a state of shock. Elizabeth, 32, resided in a picturesque three-story house with her 29-year-old husband, Matthew Sullivan, a former Navy soldier, and their two young children. Their love story began in Virginia, where they first crossed paths while Matthew was serving in the Navy. Elizabeth, a Virginia native, had always lived in the heart of the state. The two fell for each other almost immediately. After years of ups and downs, Matthew finally gathered the courage to ask Elizabeth for her hand in marriage, sealing their union in 2010. Following their marriage, they made the bold decision to relocate to San Diego, California, after Matthew was assigned to a naval service there. Elizabeth, pregnant at the time, received the news with overwhelming joy. Their happiness knew no bounds when their first baby girl arrived. Matthew, being a loving husband and father, wholeheartedly supported Elizabeth in caring for their child. The bond between them grew stronger, and soon, a second daughter graced their family. From the outside, the Sullivans appeared to be the picture of a happy, loving family. Elizabeth's sudden disappearance was a shock, a nightmare that no one could have anticipated. On the day before she vanished, Elizabeth had been in touch with her relatives and friends, sending texts and making phone calls as usual. But as the sun set that afternoon, something drastically changed. A short call to a friend in Virginia ended abruptly, and Elizabeth stopped responding to calls and messages. She had turned off her cell phone, a move that raised eyebrows among those who knew her. The following day, it was Matthew who made the distressing call to 911, reporting his wife missing. He claimed that Elizabeth had created chaos in their home, emptied their bank account, and simply vanished. But something didn't add up. It soon became apparent that Matthew wasn't the first to report her missing. A close friend had already expressed concerns when her repeated calls went unanswered, and Matthew was avoiding the situation. Elizabeth's parents, deeply worried about their daughter's absence, flew to San Diego to join the search for her. Elizabeth's personal belongings were all left behind, including identification, clothing, and her car. How could she simply vanish without a trace? As the search for Elizabeth intensified, her family, friends, and volunteer squads joined the police in their efforts. However, Matthew remained conspicuously absent from the search, refusing help from Elizabeth's family and even declining to distribute flyers with her photo. The couple had a history of frequent fights and had been living separately within their own home, like strangers under the same roof. Elizabeth had even filed for divorce, a process that was well underway. 6 months prior to her disappearance, Elizabeth had dialed 911, citing a history of domestic violence and expressing fear. Elizabeth's family revealed another startling fact. She had been planning to escape her husband, withdrawing money from their account and packing her bags. However, she couldn't leave her daughters behind with Matthew. This revelation suggested that Elizabeth had no intention of abandoning her children. Matthew's initial report to the police further raised suspicions. He seemed to portray Elizabeth as the instigator of their troubles, suggesting that she had left willingly. Despite his bizarre behavior, the police decided that Elizabeth may have left of her own accord, given that she had withdrawn the money. For over 2 long years, Elizabeth's case remained unsolved, her family desperately clinging to the hope that she would return. Then, a twist of fate. On October 6, 2016, nearly a kilometer from her home, Elizabeth's body was discovered floating in San Diego Bay. Despite the horrible condition of her body, forensic experts managed to identify her. She had been brutally stabbed and beaten, her body showing signs of a violent end. it was evident that her body had not spent the entire 2 years in the sea. She had been preserved elsewhere before being dumped. Suspicion once again fell on Matthew, her husband. Matthew had relocated with their children, this time with a new girlfriend, and Elizabeth's body was discovered around the same time. It would take another 1.5 years for detectives to gather enough evidence to secure an arrest warrant in another state. After being tracked down in Wyoming, Delaware in January 2018, Matthew was eventually returned to San Diego and charged with first-degree murder. The trial shed light on the brutal relationship between Elizabeth and Matthew, marked by domestic violence and Elizabeth's desperate attempts to escape. Matthew, however, maintained his innocence, alleging that Elizabeth had been self-destructive, engaging in extramarital affairs and substance abuse. Crucially, the prosecution presented evidence of a bloody knife found in the attic, bearing Matthew's DNA and fingerprints, along with blood that matched Elizabeth's. They argued that this was the murder weapon. After a harrowing trial, the jury found Matthew Sullivan guilty of second-degree murder. In March 2021, a judge sentenced Matthew to life in prison with parole eligibility after 16 years.